Morning Dish.
He's the hardest working man in show business. His band's music takes you into the midnight hours. And when you wake up, his voice is back on your radio alarm clock. How on earth did this happen?
Well, Jeff saw me taking out the trash at the radio station.
And he won another award.
But this one is better.
I'm your boogeyman. That's what I am.
It's the Morning Dish with the 2019 Radio Personality of the Year winner, Stephen Phillips.
You paying attention to this, Packy?
And Murphy's own Sherry Raines.
Yeah, you must have given horseback passes to the right guy, Stephen.
Well, giddy up.
And Packy Smith's Shetland pony is right alongside.
You guys know these demo tapes don't just edit themselves together, right?
Well, all right.
3 cheers for Stephen Phillips.
Y'all need to help Stephen Phillips out over there. Out the door and off the radio.
Here's Stephen Phillips.
Let's go back to and we have, the world-class Stan Goldman, who has got a new book out, Left to the Mercy of a Rude Stream. How are you, sir?
I am fine this morning. How are you?
Yeah,
Pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, man, I'm tickled you're here. It's a real privilege to have you because, you've been on the Riley, Hannity. You've been on Entertainment Tonight and the whole 9 yards, and then here you are with us on the Morning Dish, and it's a real honor to have you. And this book that you wrote, I've checked it out, and it's really interesting. It's actually about your mother during the Holocaust. That is just amazing to me. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
My mother had survived and come to America, and she all she basically knew about how she got out. She'd been in a combination of Poland and Germany for 6 years, as working slave labor for the Germans, about to be killed on several occasions, which I go through. And then one day, there's somebody who comes running through this death camp that she's in and says, "Hey, anybody here want to go to any Polish Jews here want to go to Sweden? There's a bus waiting for you." And everybody's looking at each other, and nobody wants to make a move, figuring this is just some kind of a fake from the Germans, that they're trying to trick them. And my mother, who was, according to some of the women she was with, and she was always with this group of women who she was with the entire war, were they don't want to go because they figure this is just a trap. And my mother finally said, "No, basically it can't be worse than this. Right. Let's go." So some of them do, and they get on this bus and they find themselves, after something like 3 days and 3 nights of being bombed by the British, who think they're German buses, they end up free.
Wow! And
all she knew was that that had happened to her, that she'd been saved, in the latter middle part of the war, and ended up in Sweden, in a neutral country. And so she passed. She never knew why or how. Right. And I always wondered why or how, and I could never figure it out. I tried to research it and never found it. And she passed away. She was in her late 80s. Right. And I went to visit a friend of hers in Israel who she had been saved with, the last surviving friend. And I came across some papers at a museum when I was there, and it documented the way this a deal had taken place in the last weeks of the war to release a handful of women, and it sounded just like what happened to my mother. So I went to the little old lady who's still alive, and I showed her the pamphlet, and I showed her a little tiny newspaper picture that had the pictures of some of the women in it. And I thought one of them looked like my mother a little bit, and the other looked like this woman I was talking to. So I got a magnifying glass, and I showed it to her. And she said, "Yeah, that's your mother and me. What about it?" So I had figured out how it had happened very roughly, and then for my own benefit, I decided to go out and try to get as many details as I could, and it took some years of researching during my spare time to figure it out. And eventually, a guy I knew who was a professor and specializes in Holocaust studies, when I told him the story and all that, he said I just had to write a book about it. He'd never heard anything like it, and he'd never heard about the incident. Right. And so I sat down and I did, and it turned out people really hadn't known about this, and it was quite a high level decision by the Nazis to make this exchange. Right. To sort of, so that's what the book is about. It's about rescue and how they made it through, and you know, what happened to them after the war, and what life with my mother was like with me, her only child, after the war. Because and what I do is I go through and I show that certain things she would do in life, you know, I could more or less trace back psychologically to particular things that happened to her, during the war.
I could not imagine going through the Holocaust. I mean, you know, the stories that you hear. Did she ever talk about that at all?
Almost never until the end. She allowed me to do a half-an-hour interview with her on video when she was quite older. She finally started to be willing to talk about it. But there were little things all the way through that sometimes would pop up. I remember as a teenager, I loved ice cream. I was a sugarholic.
Right.
And there was never room in the freezer for any ice cream or anything, or frozen cakes,
right,
because it was always just filled with bread,
right,
old bread, old rolls.
Right.
And she'd buy them, and she'd put them in the freezer, and they'd get frost on them, and she'd throw them away, and she'd replace them with other bread, and there was never any room for anything else. So finally, when I was 15 or so, I said, Mom, we never have any room for any ice cream. I go to everybody else's house, they got ice cream. We never have any, why is the freezer always filled with bread? And she paused, and she said, Ben, I was starving during the war.
Yeah.
She spoke this way. This is exactly the way she spoke. I do her pretty well. When I was starving during the war, I swore that if I ever got out, I would never be without bread. And then she paused for 10 seconds, just frozen, and then walked over to the bread, pulled it out of the freezer, threw it in the trash can, never saved bread again. And I thought for years, I said, well, man, maybe I did her a favor. I got her phobia out of the way.
Right.
But then if that's true, if I did do her a favor, why do I still, half a century later, still feel guilty about it?
But
without having asked. I mean,
well, that's the thing about people that went through the Depression, man. They keep egg cartons and they keep all that stuff. If you find people that went through it because they didn't have it, and one day they might need it, and that's kind of where that comes from. But I could not imagine. So
it's much like I write in some sections of the book, comparing people whose parents went through other major traumatic events around the world, before they had kids, and studies show the kind of impact it has on not only the way they behave and the way they raise their children, but there's some evidence to suggest that at least when it's happened to the mother, that it might actually have affected some hormones in the baby as it was being born,
right,
and could point a person towards a certain type of personality that might not have otherwise have taken place.
Well, this is the Holocaust to me is just mind-boggling. I mean, for me at my age, and trying to wrap your mind around what some of these people went through, and just like you say, she thought it was a trick, to get them to go out there because they did a lot of that, and
yes,
and then take them out and execute them or whatever was going on with that. But anyway, but now you've actually got something about Hitler, the reason for his death. I mean, can you shed a little light on that?
Well, I hate to give away the entire ending, but the first thing I did when I'd finished a draft of the book is I gave it to two prominent Holocaust scholars, one who I knew and one who I didn't know, but was considered top flight, and I asked them if they would read the book and tell me if I had backed up the statement, and they both agreed that I had sufficient evidence to back it up. It deals with the fact that Hitler never authorized the release of the women. And one of his underlings, and I won't go into it too much, had done it. Himmler, and when Hitler discovered this, and I have eyewitness accounts from memoirs of people who were in the bunker, at least for brief periods of time with Hitler, and a couple of them were in the bunker when the news came in that this group of women had arrived in Sweden, having been released as part of a deal by Himmler. I mean, to maybe get some connections to the West so that he could declare his own separate peace. This was a major part of a Himmler push to get the Allies to recognize him as the leader of Germany, and when Hitler discovered this, the descriptions of the people who were there in the bunker with him was that it was the end of the world for him. Mm-hmm. If his most trusted and highest advisor, Himmler, was going to do this to him, then he knew that the war was over, and that was the first moment in which it took I'm not crying over this. It took the life out of him.
Yeah, well, that's good.
So that's what the book is about. It's something I didn't realize till I got significantly way into my research. I kept tracking and seeing what the consequences were of this bizarre kind of freeing of these Jews, and that was one of them. That was it had some major impact, even on, one could argue, perhaps the day the war technically ended. Mm-hmm. Didn't affect it by months, but affected it by days or hours.
Right. Well, he was an evil person, man. There's no doubt. He was an evil person. So now, do you know how many women was actually released?
There were, the original intent was to release 1,000 women who were in this camp. And it's hard to say 1,000 were successfully released because some wouldn't go. And then, with the British bombing it, the buses were actually destroyed, and the women had to run on foot, and then they made it to another town, and the Allied, closer to the Swiss border, and then trucks were sent to take them after a few days. So I think probably something over 900 made it through. So this was a major kind of escape, surreptitious liberation that was taking place. This was not just one or two. This was a group, and yet it seems to have all but escaped the notice of history that this took place. And
I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about it. Did not.
I've given it to Holocaust scholars who spend their lives doing this, and they'd never heard of it.
So tell me this now. Tell me the name. How did the name "Left to the Mercy of a Rude Stream"? Tell me.
Oh, I didn't write it as a law professor, by the way. I should say that now. It's not a particularly complicatedly written book. I used to write for newspapers for a considerable period of time. I worked for 2.5 years for the New York Daily News, and I tried to write the book in the style that I did when I was a reporter. But the title was my one concession to being a college professor. It's a paraphrasing of a line from Shakespeare. What it means is, and I explain what it means in the book, and I refer to it a couple of times. It means that you as an individual are caught in the currents, the torrents, or however, which word you choose to use, of history. Right. In other words, you're this, you're caught in this massive flood, and the floodwaters are pushing you along. You're caught in the rapids. Right. And the question is, are you going to be able to keep your head above water and survive till somehow, some way, the river, throws you onto land, or there becomes an opportunity to grab a hold of something and get out. And that was the real meaning of it. And that's why I used it, because that's what they were. That my mother and these women were, they were used in factories to sew uniforms. They were used in munitions companies to try to help in the heart of Berlin to try to help the Germans build things. War implements. This group of women slaves, which is what they were basically just moved from one place to the next, and through the currents of history. And then there was that branch, there was that tree trunk, floating on the stream that they were able to grab a hold of and take them out of the rapids. That's what life was like for them.
Mm. So now, since you've come out with this book, have you heard anything from any other of the survivors? I mean, have any of them contacted you and like, man, I love the book? Or
I've had 3 people contact me from around the world. By the way, one was in Sydney, Australia, and one in New York, and I live in Los Angeles, so these are thousands of miles from me. But I've had 3 different people contact me to tell me that they'd heard about the book, they got the book, and their mothers were in the same group as mine. Wow! So they discovered the story through my writing about it. So there are descendants of. Although at this point, I'm not at all certain any of the women are left alive. Right. The last, I think, having perished about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But there are plenty of children that are obviously not kids themselves any longer, but who are around, and some of them are slowly but surely reaching out to me. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, well, it's really great. I mean, it's bringing them together. And like I said, I did not know anything about this. This is something that was, when I got this
sent to me. I thought, well, I've got to know about this because I love history. I love history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I really do. So now if these folks out here listening and they'd like to get a copy of this book and find out more about you, I mean, you're very impressed. I mean, golly, some of the stuff that you have done over the years, the places you've been, things you've done, the criminal law with the Loyola Law School in L.A. I mean, it's just one thing after another. But how will they find you or get up with you and get one of these books?
Well, I guess the easiest way, given the difficulties of the title, which I readily admit, is just to look up Stan Goldman, the name Stan Goldman, on either at a local bookstore, which I always like to promote, but if not, it's on Amazon. It's the publisher sells it on Amazon. There's a hard copy, there's a digital copy. A company actually bought the audio rights, and so I persuaded them into letting me do the audio book. So just under Stan Goldman, and you can't remember that too easily. Just think of Goldman Sachs without the money.
There you go.
You've got me. You've got Stan Goldman, and it's right there on Amazon. And the book is about World War II. And as I try to tell people, although there's unquestionably some sad moments in it, at least at the very early beginning of the book, it is basically a book about triumph. It's the inside story of these women who just kept going on when I'm sure I would have just laid down and died.
I'm with you.
If I'd been in that situation. They really had to have a will to live to have made it through all this.
No doubt. Well, I sure do appreciate you spending a little time with us about this. And like I said, we're going to check the book out. And I'm glad to hear that you actually got to do the audio on it, because that'll be cool.
They actually had hired an actor, when I found out about it, I wrote it. I emailed him. I said, "Look, if the actor's name is like Liev Schreiber, okay, I get it. But if it's not, I'd kind of like to do it myself." So they actually made me audition. I had to sit in my hotel room at the time, and I dictated it into my phone,
right.
Recorded it, and just sent them off about 6 minutes of because they needed to make a decision right away, and they wrote me back and said, "Yeah, you sound pretty good.
There you go.
You can do it." There
you go. Ah, man, I sure do appreciate it.
Sure. No, I appreciate you talking about the book. This is for me the labor of love of my life. I'd really like people to hear the story, especially young people. I'd like 17 and 18-year-olds to know what life was like during that period, because we think they do learn it in school, but it's not true.
It's not true. I'm with you on that. Yep, yeah. Absolutely so. All right, man, you take care.
Well, you too. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you for spending a little time with us. And remember, you can tune in every morning at WJULradio.com at 8 a.m. Eastern. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook, The Morning Dish.